Hello and welcome to the Thank You for Knitting YouTube channel. Today I want to talk about a very specific topic, which is one specific pattern, and that is the Ranunculus. My name is Alana and I'm a knitwear designer and a yarn shop owner living in Auckland, New Zealand. So if you're a knitter, chances are you've heard of the Ranunculus. Maybe you know what it is, maybe not. Maybe you've knit one, maybe you haven't. If you've knit one, you may have knit more than one, as a lot of people have. Perhaps you are wondering, why is this pattern so popular? So I wanted to do a video and just deep dive a little bit about this pattern, explain. I kind of came up with just a short list of reasons why I think that this pattern is so popular, and then I will show you my versions that I've knit. So I have knit 7 versions so far, and I am sure that I will be knitting more. So if you're wondering why is this pattern so popular? What's so special about it? What's going on? Why do I always hear this name, the Ranunculus? Hopefully I can answer some of those questions. Okay, so first off, the Ranunculus is a knitting pattern by the Japanese knitwear designer Midori Hirose, and the pattern was published originally in 2017. It's available on Ravelry and possibly other places I haven't actually checked, but Ravelry is the main hub for knitting patterns online. So if you're not familiar with Ravelry, Ravelry is the main website for all knitting patterns, whether they be independently designed or from books, magazines, etc. Ravelry is a massive database of knitting patterns. So it's my primary place that I find patterns. I also sell my patterns on there. It's where I keep track of my projects, all of that. If anyone ever wants me to do a video on how to make the most out of Ravelry, because there's actually so much that you can do on there, let me know. I'll do a video like that. We've written a couple blog posts about it on our website because Ravelry is actually a pretty complex website, meaning there's a lot of functionality on it. However, if you know how to use it properly, it's so incredibly useful if you're a knitter. So this video is not about Ravelry, this is about the Ranunculus, but I reference Ravelry a lot when I talk about patterns. So as I said, this pattern originally came out in 2017, and as long as I have been knitting, which at this point has been 7 or 8 years now, I think it has always been on the front page of Ravelry. So it's in the hot right now almost all the time. If you filter your pattern search by most popular patterns, it is almost always in the top 5 from what I've seen. If you look at most projects, most favorites, all of these different criteria, the Ranunculus pattern is basically always in the top 5 or the top 10 of all those categories. And for reference, there are more than 1 million patterns on Ravelry. So to be in the top 5 and the top 10 for many, 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 many years is kind of a big deal. And as of this filming, there are 29.3 thousand project pages on the Ravelry pattern. So again, if you're not familiar, any knitter who knits a pattern from Ravelry can create a project page, and then that project page will be linked to the pattern, and you can put photos of your project. You can link what yarns you used. You can write down any modifications you did, when you knit it, what your needle size was, all that kind of stuff on there. It's a bit like a knitting journal, but it's all online and it's all connected in with the pattern network. And so when you go to a pattern page, you can click on the projects associated with that pattern. And like I said, as of filming, there are 29.3 thousand project pages on this pattern. I was actually looking back on an email we sent out in 2023 when we were doing a Ranunculus knit along. And at that point we wrote that there were, I think, 18 point something thousand project pages. So that means in the last 2 years, we've had more than 11,000 projects or project pages added to the pattern. So clearly the popularity of this pattern does not seem to be slowing down. And I will also say, speaking as a designer, that the number of project pages associated with a pattern is usually only a fraction of the actual number of pattern sales that have been made on that pattern. So if there's 29.3 thousand project pages, I'm sure that way more people than that have actually purchased and most likely used the pattern, but not everybody creates a project page when they do so. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of, I guess, the scale of the popularity of this pattern. But let's talk about why is it so popular. At the end of this video, I'm going to show you my 7 versions that I've knit. I've got them in a stack right here, and they're all quite different, and I'll explain them later. But first, here are the 7 reasons why I believe this pattern is so popular. So reason number 1, it is on a big needle size and therefore a pretty big gauge, and that makes it fast. So number 1 is fast. I don't know about you, I knit projects in all different needle sizes and all different gauges, and obviously when you're knitting something on a smaller needle size with a tighter gauge, more stitches per inch or per 10 centimeters, the project is generally going to take longer because you're physically knitting more stitches. When you have a larger or looser gauge, you are knitting fewer stitches, so it should take much less time. And for me, one of my main draws to the Ranunculus is I think of it in my mind as this is something so quick and easy. I can just, if I'm in the mood to cast on, I can just cast on without really thinking about it because I know this project will be quick and it'll just fly off the needles. This pattern is knit on a 6mm needle and it has a 14 stitch gauge, meaning there should be 14 stitches per 10 centimeters or 4 inches. So this is a pretty loose gauge. The fastest I've ever knit any kind of adult-sized garment is one of my Ranunculuses, which took me only 3 days to knit. It was a short sleeve version, so no sleeves, but it was otherwise, you know, a full t-shirt, but on a pretty loose gauge, like I said, and I did it in only 3 days. So instant gratification can be nice sometimes. Reason number 2, it uses a small quantity of yarn. So because this project is knit on a pretty big needle, you need a relatively small amount of yarn to create one of these items. Also, there are some lacy elements in the yoke, which again gives you a larger surface area of fabric with less yarn when you have more holes in it. And it's also a relatively cropped item, or there's cropped versions, and there's a short sleeve version as well. So with all those factors combined, the smallest size, which has a 48-inch finished bust, which is actually not that small. So there's a lot of positive ease built into this garment. So the smallest size with a 48-inch finished bust requires only 370 meters of yarn. So if you, for example, are a person who has gone to fiber festivals or gone to yarn shops and you've bought those single skeins of, you know, beautiful hand-dyed yarn, those are often about 400 meters per 100 grams if it's fingering weight. So that means in theory, if you wanted a kind of a light, loose fingering weight version of a Ranunculus in the short sleeve version and on the smaller end of the size range, you could create a garment using just 1 skein of indie dyed yarn. So that's quite appealing. And that also obviously contributes to how quick this project is. You're knitting less meterage, so yeah, it's going to be quicker. So the relatively small quantity of yarn also means it could be a more affordable project depending on what yarn you're buying. So if you're buying a yarn that's a little pricier, but you know that you don't need that many meters, then you might go for it anyway and it might feel worth it. Reason number 3 is that you can use any weight of yarn for this pattern. So this is very attractive as well because no matter what yarn you have in your stash, if you're trying to use up stash or you just have a yarn you want to use but you're not sure what project it'll suit, chances are you can make a Ranunculus with it. I've made some in lace weight, I've made some in worsted weight, I've done some in 4-ply plus mohair. There's just really a lot of options as to what you can do. And so, yeah, particularly if you're trying to use stash yarn, or if you're the person who, let's say, picks the yarn before you pick the pattern, so you just find a yarn that you love, and it's any weight and also not that much quantity. For me, when that happens, I think in my mind, well, I could make this into a Ranunculus. And I think a lot of knitters think that way. When they have a smaller quantity of yarn or a miscellaneous amount of yarn, they think, oh, this could be a Ranunculus. So that's definitely part of the appeal of this yarn. You can hold strands together, do a strand on its own, super customizable to any weight of yarn. Now, obviously, depending on the yarn weight and depending on if you stick with the original needle size or not, which again, you don't have to. I've changed the needle size on some of my versions. But let's say you stick with a 6mm needle. If you're using a lace weight yarn, you'll have a super holey, loose, ethereal looking finished fabric, if you then knit that same 6mm needle and you're using a bulky weight yarn, you'll have a more dense, firm, warm fabric. So the pattern still works, but the finished result will be completely different. Okay, reason number 4 is that the pattern itself is highly adjustable. So the shape of this pattern is that it begins at the top in the style of a circular yoke, and then after that there are some raglan shaping before you split for the sleeves. So in the section that is just a circular yoke, all of the sizes begin the same. There are some different options and variations, but otherwise all of the sizes begin the same way, almost like you're starting off by knitting a necklace, you could say. And then later you can decide how many raglan increases you want to add to actually change the shape and the size of the garment. But while you're in the beginning stage, you can just cast on every size the same, and you can decide later which size you want to knit to. Now this works great because it means, for me, for sure, I would say I would never gauge swatch for a ranunculus. I would just get started and then knit the yoke part, and then you get a sense for your gauge, and then you can customize the rest of the shaping to kind of fit your body. So I've done that for a few versions of mine where my gauge wasn't, in the ballpark of what it's supposed to be, and I just added extra shaping, no problem at all. So it's just highly, highly adjustable. There are 11 sizes, so it's a big size range. Like I said, there's a lot of positive ease built into it, which also just gives you a lot of leeway when it comes to fit. And then they all start the same, so you can just cast it on without thinking, decide later what size you want to do, or if you want to modify the size. So I think that makes it really, really approachable. I know, again, for myself, if I'm thinking what to knit and I'm kind of thinking of maybe casting on impulsively, or I'm in the mood where I might just cast on impulsively, I know that with a ranunculus, there's basically no barrier to entry because I can grab any yarn, I can get started, I don't have to worry about gauge, I don't have to worry about size, I can just get going and kind of make those other decisions later. So I think that also makes this pattern just highly approachable. It makes you feel like something you can just go for it. Reason number 5, there are a lot of options. So this is just quick and self-explanatory, but I think it's part of the reason. So in this pattern, there are 2 different necklines you can choose from. There are short sleeve versions, long sleeve versions. I think there's a tapered sleeve version, a balloon sleeve option. You can do cropped length, full length. So there's just a lot of customization already built into the pattern. And it kind of just gives you permission to feel like you can really customize a lot of the elements of the design to suit what it is that you're looking for, to suit your yarn and to suit your needs. Whether you're making a more summer focused ranunculus or a more warm winter focused ranunculus, it's just really easy to customize with all these different options and again, achieve a different result. Reason number 6, this is more, I guess this is my opinion, but I definitely feel this way after knitting a lot myself and also seeing a lot of other people knit a lot of things and seeing a lot of people in ranunculuses over the years. My opinion is that the shape of this garment is very flattering on almost any body shape. So I have seen so many different people with different body shapes wearing a ranunculus, and it almost always looks good. So I am of the opinion that when you start with the yoke and then you move to raglan shaping, it's a good fit, it's a good look. I've just seen it looks good on so many people. I also think that the slightly looser gauge lends itself to a bit of a more drapey fabric. And this is also likely to suit a lot of people because the garment is draping over your body rather than if you were making something, let's say, in a woolen spun yarn at a super tight gauge. You'd end up with maybe a more stiff fabric that might be a little less forgiving, depending on if you get the shape and the fit a little bit wrong or a little bit off. I feel like with the ranunculus, when you include the gauge, the needle size, the drape, the positive ease, the yoke shaping with the raglan, it just seems to look good on everyone. I've seen, like I said, so many people wearing these in different yarns, different colors, different, sizes, whatever, and it just always looks good. And finally, reason number 7 is that there are video tutorials for a ton of the techniques that are used in the pattern. So this pattern is not your typical idea of a beginner sweater pattern. I think we typically would think of a beginner sweater pattern as something in plain stockinette without a lot of techniques, with a, super standard basic cast on, and, not a lot of shaping or short rows or anything like that. Whereas the Ranunculus, it has an unusual cast on, it has short rows, it has lace and texture stitches. It's got I-cord bind-offs, I think. I've never done the I-cord bind-offs, but that is part of the original pattern. So there are a lot of different techniques in the pattern. So it's not, again, your typical idea of just a super simple beginner pattern, but there are video tutorials for, I think, basically every single technique that's used. Now, I've never actually watched any of the video tutorials myself. I just haven't done that. But I see on the Ravelry page that there's a long list of video links, and I've heard other knitters talk about using those tutorials and finding them very helpful. We've also had a handful of people in the shop who have used the Ranunculus as their very first garment pattern, and they've said that it went great because they watched all the videos, and the videos really just walk you through every step of the way, so you know what you're doing. So I think that's also worth noting. It's a really nice thing to have as part of this pattern, all those video tutorials. Now I'll add to that, this is not on my list, but I'll add on to that, I think the fact that you have almost 30,000 project pages on Ravelry is also very helpful, because you can browse through other people's projects and you can get a lot of inspiration on what yarns to use, what colors look good, what fibers you might want to use. You can see other people make notes on the different modifications that they've done, so you could choose to maybe follow along with some of their modifications. So I just think the fact that so many people have knit this pattern lends itself well to people knitting it. There's just so much out there. There's so many pictures on Instagram of people's ranunculuses. I'm sure there's a hashtag about it, and you can find a lot of pictures on there, a lot of pictures on Ravelry. So yeah, so those are my thoughts. Those are my 7 reasons why I think this pattern is so popular. And if I've missed anything, please let me know. I'm actually interested in this conversation. So if I've missed anything important, leave a comment, let me know. Is there something I forgot to mention about why this pattern is so popular? I would love to hear in general what your thoughts are on this pattern, and if you've made them, and kind of why you think you make so many of them, if you have. This is the only pattern I've ever made 7 of. Well, it's definitely the only garment pattern I've ever made 7 of. I think other than this, I've maybe made 2 of the same garment pattern. Otherwise, I usually make a pattern once and then move on. But I've made 7 of these, and I know that I will make more. And so there is something magical about this pattern that keeps you coming back for more. And I think, those 7 reasons more or less encapsulate why it's that way for me. But yeah, I'm curious what you think. Now I want to talk about my 7 versions and just go through them quickly. I'll show you the yarns I used. I will mention if I made modifications, which I have made modifications on all of mine, I think. Some more dramatic modifications than others. But yeah, I'll just show you my versions. Okay, so my first ever Ranunculus I made between March and April 2022. And I used a 6mm and a 5mm needle. So I basically used the 5mm needle for the neckline ribbing. And I also didn't do the recommended cast on, I just did a standard cast on. I didn't do the initial increases. I cast on with my smaller needle the number of stitches that you end up with after you've done your first increase. I made a note as well that my gauge was a little bit tighter than the pattern, which I was happy with. I didn't want a super loose fabric or a super loose garment. And the other main modification I did on my first one is that I didn't want the rows of eyelets and holes on mine. I was just thinking about having to worry about what I was wearing underneath, and I just didn't really want to have that. So instead I found a little slip stitch pattern that was in a stitch dictionary, and I just replaced the eyelets for a little slip stitch pattern. And then I made a note that I maintained the same ratio of raglan increases that correspond to the size 2 of the pattern. So this is my project. I will insert a photo that shows the original yarns. So I used a combination of fingering weight and mohair. So you can see here where I've done the slip stitch pattern instead of the eyelets. And yeah, so pretty. So I used Malabrigo Makita, which is a 100% single spun superwash merino. And then I held it together with Happy Go Knitty Karoo, which was her mohair silk. And the mohair silk was in a much more multicolored, rich purple sort of color scheme, where the Makita was more or less like a vaguely purplish gray. The color of the Makita is Plomo, and the color of the Happy Go Knitty was Cheshire Cat. And I used less than 2 skeins of each for this whole project. So that means I used about 750 meters of each yarn. So not crazy meterage, considering I did very long sleeves on mine. I didn't do any decreases on my sleeves either. I just did straight down and then a little rapid decrease at the end and then some ribbing. But it is a full-length garment. I mean, it's a little bit cropped for sure in the body because that's how I like my garments, but the sleeves are full and long and a little bit loose. And yeah, I did that with less than 750 meters total, so not bad at all. So yeah, that is my first version of the Ranunculus. Okay, my second version was a birthday Ranunculus. So sometimes I like to do a birthday cast on. I don't think I've done it every year, but I think a birthday cast on is fun, where you just cast on something just for fun. And so I had just 1 skein each in a fingering weight yarn, and then 1 skein of mohair. And again, I knew I could make a Ranunculus with just 1 skein of each. So I made this one in July 2022, and it only took me 6 days, less than a week. And again, I used a 5mm and a 6mm needle. I'll show you. So there it is. So short sleeved. Very, very bold colors. I don't wear this anymore because I realized at some point that this is very much not my colors. But the yarns made me happy at the time. And yeah, I had 1 skein of hedgehog fibers, skinny singles, which again is a single spun superwash merino. The colorway is Insomnia. And then I had 1 skein of hedgehog fibers, kid silk lace, and the color is Birthday Cake. So the kid silk has 420 meters and the singles were only 366 meters. So I actually was running out just towards the bottom, and I happened to have some of Hedgehog's sock yarn in the same color, Insomnia. I only used apparently like 40 meters or 10 grams of that just down at the bottom just to make it long enough. But otherwise I did similar mods to my first one. So I did the same thing where I cast on long tail, smaller needle, did my ribbing, skipped the first increase. I did twisted knits and purls for my ribbing, and this one I knit exactly to pattern in terms of all of the eyelets and all of the texture in the yoke. So that's all according to the original pattern. And I wrote down that I wanted this one to be a bit more fitted, so I knit it in the smallest size for myself. The other thing that's a little bit of a mod that I did is the original pattern, the short sleeve version, you just stop at the sleeve split and you bind off right then and there. And what I prefer to do instead is I act as if I'm going to do the long sleeve version, so I put my stitches on hold, and then I just came in and did about 1 inch or so of ribbing so that it's a short sleeve, but it's not quite as short as the original pattern. And I also wrote that I knit the body length to 9 inches, then switched back to my smaller needle and did about 1 inch of ribbing, which was how much I had until I ran out of yarn. So I ended up with basically 10 inches from underarm to the bottom of the garment. This is so soft and so pretty. Like I said, I don't wear it anymore because it's not my colors, but we might do a little sample sale soon and just try to sell this in a sample sale because I bet someone will love it. I still love it. Okay, my third Ranunculus, this was one where I didn't use mohair, so I just did a single strand of yarn. And for this, I was using Prosper Yarn Batch DK. I don't think they actually do this yarn anymore, but this was a 70-30 merino and linen yarn, and it's DK weight. Sorry, this has been folded up, so it's a bit foldy, but here it is. So this one I knit in just 3 days. This was in November 2022. And I used a 5.5 millimeter needle for the main needle and a 4.5 for the ribbed edgings. I did similar mods to both of my other versions where I just had a slightly tighter gauge on my neckline with the ribbing, and I've never actually done the cast on that's recommended in the pattern. I generally always just do a long tail or a twisted rib cast on. The Prosper yarn that I used, the color is called Ent, and I had only 2 skeins, so just 2 skeins of DK weight yarn, which is very impressive. It is a little cropped, but it's a full garment. So just 466 meters total. 200 grams to make this shirt. Another mod that I did was I just did the short rows in the back and not on the front. This is the only pattern I've ever seen that has short rows on the front, and I don't really know what purpose they serve. I did it on one of my versions, I think, and then I just didn't really see why it was there, so I don't do that anymore. So I just do the short rows in the back, not on the front. I did the same sort of thing where I just added a little bit of ribbing for the sleeve, and I just did the yoke as written in the pattern as well. So this is a bit more of a summery one because it's got the merino linen. However, after having worn it a few times, I decided that it was a bit warmer than I actually like in the summer, and I do have a 3rd skein of this yarn at home. So I've been meaning to at some point undo this ribbing and actually pick up and knit longer sleeves. I think I'll wear this more if it's in long sleeves. But yeah, but that's my Prosper yarn version. And yeah, I mean, it just took 3 days of knitting. I mean, it was so instant gratification. Okay, this one I will definitely insert photos of because it looks better in the photos. I've mentioned this garment before on this podcast, but this one I love. And this one I knit in just a single strand of lace weight mohair silk. So it is incredibly lightweight and ethereal and just really delicate and beautiful. So this version was originally inspired from Jonna from the podcast Knit Together with Kim and Jonna, because Jonna knit one sort of like this to go over a dress that she wore to a wedding. And that's exactly what I was doing with this. So I found myself as a member of a wedding party, and the dress that I was meant to wear was just a very thin spaghetti strap dress with a pretty low cut neckline. And personally, I didn't really want to wear it on its own, that style of dress. So I thought, what if I knit myself like Jonna did, this, super lightweight ranunculus to go on top of it? Because I think these lacy patterns in the yoke really make it look elegant, and you can dress it up for sure. And so this version is intentionally very, very cropped because I just wanted the bottom to be able to be tied at my waistline. I used CC of Vivian, which is one of the mohair yarns we carry at the shop. It's a 70-30 mohair silk, lace weight, 210 meters per 25 grams, very standard mohair yarn. And I used only 2 balls of it, less than 2. I used 1.6, so I used only 336 meters. These are like the little 25-gram balls of mohair, and I only used less than 2. 40 grams of yarn total, so this thing is very lightweight. The color of the Vivian is 5026, which is this lovely sort of dusky pink color. And you'll see when I insert a photo that the color was almost a perfect match for the bridesmaid's dress, and I think it ended up working out perfectly. So my modifications were that I used a 5mm needle the whole time. I did a twisted German cast on. I did twisted knits and regular pearls for my ribbing, which was just 5 rounds. All these notes are in my Ravelry, by the way. If you want to actually see the details, I wrote all my mods in my Ravelry. I won't rattle off all my mods, but yeah, my primary modification was that I made this very, very short, and then I created this long I-cord to thread through the bottom so that I could tie it at the waist just to kind of give it that shape. And I also wrote in my notebook, so it says that it took me a couple weeks to make this, but I wrote down in my notebook, and I do recall that I actually knit the whole garment in about 2 or 3 days. It just took me a while to get the I-cord done. I didn't do the I-cord for a while. And so then I finally finished that, and it was officially finished. But yeah, this is my bridesmaid ranunculus, and I highly recommend anybody does this for if you need to dress up, if you need a slightly fancy occasion outfit and you want to knit something. I mean, it could be beautiful even if, let's say, you wanted to make something for your own wedding. Imagine making this in like a single strand of pure white mohair and then wearing this over a wedding dress. I don't know, that could be really beautiful. Either way, it was super unique, really fit to purpose, and it worked perfectly for that. So I'm very happy about that. Okay, this is technically my 4th ranunculus, but I guess I finished it later. So again, I followed the shaping for the smallest size, and I used a 5.5 millimeter needle and a 5 for the ribbings. I did very similar modifications to the last one. I did a little bit of decreasing on the sides of the waistline because I had limited yarn. So I remember when I decided to make this, I had bought one of those 200 gram cakes, I guess, of Noro Kakigori. So Noro Kakigori is a blend of cotton, silk, rayon, and nylon. So it's all non-wool fibers. So it's, it's definitely a summery type of yarn. And I used 80% of the skein. So I used a total of 489 meters. And the color I had was number 7, Hakodate. And yeah, you can just see all the beautiful kind of multicolored flecks that go on. Noro has such beautiful colors. One comment I will say is this is the only time I've ever experienced this in knitting. There's quite a lot of biasing happening with the yarn. I don't mind at all, but if you look closely, you can sort of see that the way the stitches go is just twisting a little bit. It doesn't bother me, but otherwise I more or less followed the pattern with similar mods that I always do. So my sleeves were a little bit longer this time, but still short sleeved. And I did the net neckline pretty much according to the pattern. Short rows only in the back, and yeah, it's a super cute summer version. So this one took me about a couple of weeks, and I made this in February, March 2023. And my 6th ranunculus I made in June 2023, took a few weeks it looks like. Again, I followed the instructions for the smallest size, and I did similar mods to kind of all the other ones I've done. Now this is the only one where I will say the neckline is stretched out a fair bit, so I would potentially change how I did that, or I might even come in later and do some crochet edging or something to tighten this up. But otherwise, this version, I used Cecia Mistral and Cecia Vivian, so that's a 4-ply merino and a lace weight mohair silk held together. Really beautiful color. Really soft yarns, super lovely. So we carry both of these yarns at the shop, and it's nice because a lot of the colors match. I used, less than 4.5 balls of the of the Mistral, which come in 50 gram sort of donut cakes. And then I used just 3 of the little, also donut cakes of the Vivian. So 75 grams of mohair, 215 grams of merino. You can see these are not huge quantities of yarn considering you're making a whole garment. So again, this is definitely part of the appeal. And yeah, held the yarns together. Again, it's a reasonably cropped sweater length, but exactly the kind of length I love. I followed the pattern for the yoke, and the sleeves, they're kind of like a 3/4 length sleeve on me, which is what I was going for. So it hits about here. I'll try to insert a photo of me wearing it, but yeah, super cute. I like this version. This is just a very classic version. Okay, finally, my 7th ranunculus. So this one, I really wanted a summer version, just a summer t-shirt kind of version. And so I also followed the smallest size, but I ended up modifying it because my gauge was a lot tighter. And I knit this one in June 2024. Again, this took me 6 days, less than a week, very quick. And yeah, I used a 5 millimeter needle. I used 670 meters of yarn total, so a bit more yarn because my gauge was tighter. And I just really wanted a summery t-shirt kind of version. So for ages in my stash, I had 5 balls of the Liang yarns Lino, which is a 100% linen yarn, and it's in a bit of like a chain structure, so it's quite airy and nice. I had five balls of it, which was about 555 meters. I did end up adding just a little bit of some Ericanite Studio linen because I was running low on the long yarns. So just less than 50 grams of that. And they happen to have a color called Fatigue 403 that is almost exactly the same as the color of the Lino, which was color 784. This one, I did the ribbing on a 4mm needle because I wanted a little bit of a higher and tighter neckline. I did normal rib, not twisted. I knew I was going to wear this sort of on its own in the summer, so again, I didn't want the holes, and so instead I replaced them with this it's kind of like a loose cable. I really like how it turned out, but you can sort of see it here. There's just like this single loose cable that I did instead of the eyelets, and I think it's quite pretty. And then otherwise, I followed the pattern, but my gauge was significantly tighter, and so I ended up doing extra raglan increases. And again, I've got notes in my Ravelry on exactly how many raglan increases I did. If you are interested, you can check that out. And basically, I just did this by, I tried it on when I got into the increase section where I was supposed to slit for sleeves. I tried it on and realized it's not long enough in the yoke depth, and it's going to be too tight. So I just continued increasing until it felt right. Same sort of modification on the sleeves, similar length body. I don't know if you can tell, but basically the ribbings on the sleeves and the bottom are in the different yarn. But I mean, you can't even tell. It looks the same. So it was a perfect match. And this is just drapey, it's summery. I really like this one. I've actually probably worn this one the most. I will definitely make more summer versions, I think. But that's basically all I have to say about that one. And yeah, that concludes my 7 versions of the Ranunculus so far. I'm often thinking of different versions of the Ranunculus that I could make. So I've actually been thinking about it lately. I might cast one on soon. We'll see. That is all I have for you today. So hopefully this video has been reasonably useful. If you have any questions or comments at all, again, I would love to hear your thoughts. Like if there's anything major I forgot to say about the Ranunculus, mention it below. Have you knit this before? What yarn did you use? What did you like about it, if you liked it? If you're like me and you've knit multiple versions, I'm also keen to hear, why do you think we like this pattern so much? Why do you think you've knit multiple if you have? What is it about it? Because this pattern is super popular, and again, these are my thoughts on why, but I wonder what you think. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you soon. Bye.